So good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wild Sheep webinar series. I'm Amanda Verhule. I'm the Executive Director of the National Bighorn Sheep Center. Our mission is to provide education and outreach for the national conservation of wild sheep, wildlife, and wildlands. Tonight in our Wild Sheep webinar series, we present trails, tracks, and migration corridors. Wyoming is one of the most incredible wild places left on Earth, in my opinion, with a population density of only 5.97 people per square mile. We are in a unique situation, allowing some of the longest migration patterns in the lower 48. The Wyoming Migration Initiative was established to advance the understanding, appreciation, and conservation of Wyoming's migratory ungulates by conducting innovative research and sharing scientific information through public outreach. We have three incredibly talented panelists presenting with us this evening. Our first panelist is Sara Dewey. Sara is a wildlife biologist in the Grand Teton National Park. She leads the park's ungulate program and has worked on a range of wildlife projects during her time in the park, some of which have included investigations of mule deer migration, bighorn sheep ecology and genetics, wolf predation patterns and social dynamics, and wildlife vehicle collisions. Before working at Grand Teton, Sara worked for the Forest Service, monitoring forest raptors, conducting surveys for lynx and wolverine, and preparing biological assessments and evaluations. Sara graduated from Colby College in Maine and holds a Master of Science in Wildlife Biology from Colorado State University. Our second panelist this evening is Sara Domek. Sara is the Wyoming Migration Program Director at the Nature Conservancy. Sara was born in Wyoming and grew up in Kemmerer and Cora, which is close to the land and the communities of Western Wyoming. She worked with the U.S. Forest Service on wilderness trail crews since the age of 16. She received a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Studies and Ecological Restoration from Northland College in northern Wisconsin, and a Master of Science in Nonprofit Management and Philanthropy in Bayfield College. Sara has worked on loon research studies in northern Minnesota, the Fisheries Department for Wyoming Game and Fish, as a field research site manager and cook for Teton Science Schools, a public land organizer with the Wyoming Wilderness Association, and served as the executive director for the National Bighorn Sheep Center for 6 years before coming to TNC. Before stepping into her current role as the Migration Program Director for the Wyoming chapter, Sara worked with TNC's amazing donor base and the Associate Director of Development for 3 years. Sara loves working to help bring her passion for place and the amazing wildlife of Wyoming together in her work with TNC, which is focused on Wyoming's migrating wildlife. Sara lives in DuBois, Wyoming with her husband and their son Tosai, Sadie the Border Collie, and the chicken flock. She loves hunting, backpacking, Nordic skiing, and fishing. Our third panelist this evening is Arthur Lawson. Along with his position on our board of directors, Art Lawson is the director of the Shoshone and Arapaho Tribal Fish and Game, located in Fort Washakie, Wyoming on the Wind River Reservation. He joined, just checking to see if we have any more coming in here. He joined Tribal Fish and Game Department in 2015 as a game warden. Before joining the department, Arthur was a police officer with the BIA, Police Department Wind River Agency. He became a police officer to eventually become a game warden. Arthur's biggest desire is to protect the natural resources and educate tribal members on the importance of natural resources on the Wind River Reservation. He has a passion for the outdoors and conservation, which goes hand in hand with his job. Efforts include working with a nonprofit to build fly fishing lodge on the Wind River Reservation, creating an outdoor-based economy while encouraging tribal youth to become involved in the outdoors. Arthur's personal goal is to increase the number of wild sheep on the Wind River and enhance the habitat for bighorns year-round, especially on the winter range. This will benefit bighorn populations such as Absaroka, Temple Peak, and Whiskey Mountain herds that occur across jurisdictional boundaries. Further, he will continue to spread the message of the importance of protecting our natural resources. Arthur was born and raised in Wyoming. He is married to Renee. and they have 3 girls and 1 grandson. His interests are spending time with his family, hunting, and recently acquired fly fishing. I'd like to remind you all to please keep your audio muted while they are presenting. We will open it up with questions and answers around 6:45. So go ahead and take it away, Sara, Dewey. All right.
So there's great. Thanks everyone for being here this evening. I'm going to apologize a little in advance because my presentation is the one that is glitching a little bit. And so we're unable to get it to go into presenter mode. So we're going to have to do something a little unusual and just scroll through these slides like this. So tonight, Sara, Art, and I are going to talk about migrations. And I'm going to start off talking about the phenomenon of migration, how it plays out here in Northwest Wyoming, why animals migrate, how biologists in the park have studied these migrations, specifically those mule deer. And hopefully I'm going to set Art and Sara up to highlight what it takes to conserve these spectacular migrations and what work is going on to do so. So before I get started, I just want to acknowledge the many individuals and funders who have contributed to the migration research within the park. And as you'll see, it truly takes a village to conduct this kind of research and translate what is learned into conservation actions. So when you think about the great wildlife migrations on Earth, you might conjure up images of faraway animals and places like wildebeests or zebras in the Serengeti. Maybe you think about monarch butterflies moving or flying to central Mexico. Maybe it's Arctic terns, literally migrating to the ends of the earth from the Arctic Circle to the Antarctic Circle and back again. Or caribou. They have the longest migration of any land mammal at over 700 miles round trip. And closer to home, we have sandhill cranes migrating from the southern US and northern Mexico to the northern US and Canada. Migration is all around us here in the northwest corner of the state within the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. We are so very fortunate to still have our own incredible migrations. We're living in a time when wildlife science technology has advanced with GPS radio collars, remote cameras, and other tools that we can use to document and understand migration. And really, we are in a sense rediscovering what the indigenous people before us knew when they followed the tracks and trails of migrating wildlife as they moved across the landscape. Our own remarkable migrations include the renowned path of the pronghorn connecting Jackson Hole and the Gros Ventre River drainage with the Green River Basin. We also have spectacular elk migrations moving from the edges of the greater Yellowstone into the center, crossing high mountain passes, swimming swollen rivers. We have bison making migrations in and out of the national park and the challenges that go with that, living in a human-dominated landscape. And finally, to the truly impressive movements of mule deer going here, there, and everywhere, as you'll soon see. So to just start off and make sure we're all coming from the same place of understanding, I'll just focus a minute on why animals migrate. And it's because the places that they summer, like the Tetons or Jackson Hole or the Wind River Mountains, those places are pretty inhospitable in the winter. And so you can see this picture of Jackson Hole in the winter. It's cold with deep snow, very little to eat. But in the summer, it looks like this. It's green with high quality and really abundant forage. And so animals like mule deer and pronghorn, to survive and thrive in these seasonally variable environments, they migrate. And so once the snow blankets the valley floor, it's just the animals that are well adapted to that cold, snowy environment that stay. And in Jackson, it's the bison. They have woolly coats and they're well adapted with strong head and neck muscles to get at food that's buried under snow. Or you've got something like moose with tall, long legs, so it can navigate deep snow, and long, hollow hair that keeps them warm during the sub-zero temperatures. But mule deer or pronghorn, they have a pretty slender build, relatively short legs, and so their strategy is to leave and travel to places where winter conditions are usually a little less severe, and there's some food resources available. And this strategy pays off for them in terms of migrating individuals having better survival and in some cases better reproduction. So like most studies of migration, you're likely aware that we use GPS radio collars like as seen on this deer with an uplink to satellite to obtain data on animal movements. And what is different about how we have gone about capturing animals is that the deer are only present in Grand Teton in the summertime. And they occur at low density, and we can't capture them by way of net gunning them from a helicopter. So instead we have to dart them from the ground, which involves sneaking up on them and getting close enough so that you can get a dart into an animal. And so you can see here we are like stalking a few individual deer that are bedded down here, and then finding our deer, because occasionally they'll run off, and we have a transmitter in that dart so that we can locate the individual after it moves away. And then we process the animal. We have them on oxygen. We're evaluating their vital rates to make sure they're doing okay while they're under these immobilization drugs. We'll deploy the collar, and then we'll reverse the drug, and the animal will get up and move off. And so a little bit about what we've discovered through this work, or rediscovered as the case may be, is that what our data has revealed was really beyond our wildest imaginations. Based on 388 migration sequences. So a migration sequence is either one fall or one spring migration from 113 individuals. Deer that summer in the park come from at least 10 different mule deer herds from around the state. So they come, from the Cody area, they come from Idaho, they come from Jackson, and they come from this western front of the Wind River range. And what I want to focus in on now is these migrations to the upper Wind River drainage. So we're looking at these right here. So we have one deer that we captured and collared in the northern part of Grand Teton National Park in an area called Moose Basin. And this deer migrated to Dubois, basically. She spent multiple winters in the Horse Creek drainage, and this is her. Her number was GT4. She moved back and forth doing the movement over multiple years. And then we also had several deer that we captured and collared near Jenny Lake in the park. And those deer moved all the way onto the Wind River Reservation and spent the winter around Crowheart Butte. Okay, so in this figure, we're looking at a elevational profile for the deer that migrated from Moose Basin to Dubois. So you can see that there's a lot of elevation gain and loss as this deer is going the 75 miles it migrates to get to Dubois. And across the bottom, what we're looking at is the land jurisdictions that this animal crosses as it's making its migration. So first it's on National Park Service land, the red, then it's in the National Forest, then it goes in a tiny little bit of BLM land, and it then spends most of the winter, finishes its migration all on private land. So it crosses 4 different management jurisdictions as it begins to, or as it makes its migration. And if I had included a map for the animals that migrate from Jenny Lake to the Wind River Reservation, those individuals traverse 7 jurisdictions, and that's the most of any of the migrations that we've documented leaving the park. And those jurisdictions include the Park Service, Forest Service, BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service land, state lands, reservation, and again, private land. And so when we start to look at data in this way, it helps us begin to think about who needs to be at the table when we're talking about conservation, when we're thinking about who needs to be involved in conserving these routes. So when we begin to think about how to maintain connectivity for these animals, on the landscape, we can think about the threats that they encounter as they make their way between seasonal ranges. And these can include things like rural development, new subdivisions in lands that were previously unaltered, or industrial development. Our roadways certainly affect animals, both in terms of they can be a barrier to movement, but they can also kill a significant number of animals. And then other barriers like fences are also a thing that we need to consider. And so I want to pose, 2 questions for folks to think about, like, what do you want the future to be for migratory wildlife? Why do you care about this? And when I think about answering this for myself, it comes down to wanting future generations to be able to experience and appreciate wildlife the way we have it today, to be able to witness these spectacular migrations. But if you think about it, for that to be possible, it can't just be about future human generations. It's got to be future generations of deer, elk, or whatever ungulate you're talking about. We need to give these critters room to roam so that we can maintain the integrity of the landscape, because that room to roam is what sustains these populations. You can think about wildlife movement or migrations as the arteries in your body. And if you sever a main artery, it can do a lot of damage. It might even kill you. And so these migratory populations, in that same way, they need these arteries, they need these migration corridors, but they also need those seasonal ranges, the summer range, the winter range, in order to meet their year-round biological needs. And so to be thinking about how do we sustain these for the future, we need to maintain the integrity of the landscape and ensure that these animals can move back and forth, and have their young so that the populations continue into the future. And so I'm going to end by asking the question, what does it take to conserve these migratory species? And the answer comes down to data. We have with this data, we're able to connect the dots, if you will, to map the corridors and migrations and identify what's important and essential to each of these different species. But as importantly, it takes partnerships to bring conservation actions to fruition. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sara and Art to talk about some of the work that they've been involved in that give examples of these kind of partnerships. So thank you.
Thank you, Sara Dewey. Sara Domek should be sharing any moment here.
Can you all see that all right?
Yes.
Great. Thanks so much, Amanda, for the introduction, and Sara, and thanks to Art, who I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for, so please help me track time, Amanda and everyone. So many of you are aware that the Nature Conservancy has been around in Wyoming for over 30 years, and like the National Bighorn Sheep Center and like the Park Service and like the Tribal Fish and Game, we work alongside a lot of different partners, like Sara just ended with landowners, agencies, industry partners across the board, private landowners, to ensure that there are wild and working lands for future generations. I'm just a few months into stepping into this role as a migration program director. My predecessor was based up in Cody in this position, but this is a really exciting time for the Nature Conservancy with our program because we're opening the doors to some new focal landscapes, including that of the Wind River Front. As Sara's pointed out, big game migration's gotten a lot of interest in Wyoming in recent years, and there's lots of good reason for that. One is that big game migrations really involve this vast expanse of multi-ownership, working lands, federal lands, dynamic. It's very global in its consideration when you think of the different jurisdictions and boundaries that these animals are crossing. And we're at a time, like Sara pointed out, that we're learning so many new things about these migrations, from the herds themselves to the individuals making these journeys. We see these ungulates in particular in many visible front country areas in the winter, so we are aware of them there. And then they disperse out to these landscapes that are really critical to their survival year-round. So the health and the integrity of these migratory herds is really the reflection of the health and intactness of a large landscape. And in Wyoming, it's globally valued. Scientists, wildlife managers, people on the lands, our indigenous people have long recognized that big game animals migrate through Wyoming. It's key for animal survivalship, as Sara pointed out, and the continued access to food is a key component of that. Many of the collaring efforts that Sara mentioned, showcase this amazing story and pictures that cover really not just within the Greater Yellowstone, but the majority of the state of Wyoming. The other central idea is that Wyoming is home to some of the longest distance migrations in the world, and preserving these is really worthy in and of itself. One of the longest, like Sara mentioned, just over the divide from us is the Red Desert to Hoback mule deer migration. It stretches over 150 miles from near Rock Springs down here, all the way up to the Grand Teton National Park. The Path of the Pronghorn, equally a long distance, incredible migration, showcases that it's also very old, a lot of these migrations, with archaeological evidence there at Trapper's Point, seen in this picture, suggesting that animals have moved through there for over 6,000 years. long distance migratory mule deer, when we focus in on them, consistently have higher fat reserves than even even lactating deer with 2 fawns have even higher fat reserves than resident mule deer when they are on the same winter range. So overall, the resident deer that are sticking around and not moving and not migrating, not making these big migrations, are declining in population. So migration is a winning strategy for these animals. Calories are often the main detriment of survival, and last winter was a really painfully evident showcasing of that in places of western Wyoming where more than half of herds died due to starvation. For us here in Dubois in the upper Wind River country, we see these migrations firsthand, and with mule deer calling our yards home alongside us in the winter. With this in mind, I'm going to focus in on a few recent migration data points that have been accumulated from collaring studies. I'm going to focus on mule deer and elk, essentially focused on the intersection of the northern portion of the Wind River Reservation and extending into the surrounding landscape north and west. Their accumulation of work done by the Wyoming Migration Initiative and Wyoming Game and Fish Department in cooperation with the Wind River Reservation and many others from about 2018 and on. This is a map showing the Owl Creek Mountains mule deer herd. This herd numbers about 3,000 with movements from the northern section of the Wind River Reservation on through the East Fork, the Game and Fish Commission lands, through private and public lands in the Dubois area, on into the Zorka Range. Even this kind of wily one went up into the South Fork of the Shoshone near Cody, and all the way up into the mixed grasslands they come from the mixed grasslands in the Wind River Reservation in the winter up into the high country in the summer. Just highlighting a few migrations here. Next is the Wiggins Fork elk herd. It's about 6,000 animals that migrate from the southern foothills near Dubois, so the East Fork and Wiggins Fork drainages, into the mountains of Yellowstone National Park and Bridger-Teton National Forest. A lot of private land and public land interspersed where they winter in the Dubois area, which is really key to their survival. The Dubois mule deer herd, locally we're really familiar with this herd based here in Dubois and off the reservation. It's about 6,000 to 7,000 animals. This is one that Sara kind of highlighted in some of her maps. Some of them make distance of 200 miles in their migrations into the heart of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. These are the ones that we see from very commonly in the winter, and a pretty incredible migration story there. And this one, it may seem like the same, but it's actually a little separately identified in the migration data, is the Wind River mule deer herd. What's really unique about this herd of about 1,500 deer is because some down here on the reservation that Art knows very well have entire migration routes just on reservation land. So moving down from the, on the reservation low country in the winter all the way up into the Wind River roadless area in the summer. Also, these migrate all the way into Grand Teton National Park. The entire herd winters entirely within the reservation. So another critical component of that connection. And finally, the last map I'll share is of the Owl Creek Meeteetse mule deer herd. It's about 4,000 deer. Some really interesting patterns of migration along the grasslands, front country, along just south of Meeteetse country, all the way into the Zorkas, all the way even into the upper Wiggins Fork and Dunor area in the summer. So what we know, and as Sara pointed out, there's obvious notion that migrations and wildlife know no boundaries. These animals are crossing from tribal jurisdiction to private BLM, state, forest, and back again every season just in order to survive. So the more mechanisms and support that we as conservation partners can put on the ground and really across all these landscapes, the more likely these animals are going to survive. And I'm going to highlight next just a few areas that the Nature Conservancy has and will continue to be working on to accomplish this. So the Nature Conservancy is really focused on the long-term persistence of these ungulates on the landscape. We know how valuable they are to our ecology, economy, our culture. We want to see them continue resilient to changing climate, invasive species, disease, development, all the many pressures that are on these animals by maintaining access to year-round habitat and in particular the migration corridors. We advance science through our own research along with supporting collaring studies. We also support policy. Here TNC really is focused on shaping the way federal funding programs like the farm bills are delivered on the ground to private landowners, and also providing relevant feedback on processes that relate to migration corridors, such as the Path of the Pronghorn designation, which is a process underway right now. We also continue to engage in public outreach and education. And we're also, I think, one of the main roles that over the years we've played as kind of a unique place is finding ways to increase capacity for funding for these projects. I'll highlight a few of those pieces in a minute. And across Wyoming, committed landowners have worked with TNC over the years to protect over 300,000 acres of important habitat through conservation easements. We have 185 conservation easements that prevent subdivision and keep places having their integrity into the future. On the science side, I won't go into this too much. Sarah covered it, and I'm sure Art will too some more, but connecting the dots is really what this is about. It's really incredible when you see these migration maps, as many of you have, literally showing how far these animals move, when they move, where they move, the behavioral aspects, as Sarah pointed out, the timing on different landscapes that they're moving across, their response to barriers, how much of a fidelity they have to certain corridors. And TNC has supported many of these projects over the years and really has been adding to that growing base of data that tells this critical story. One of the innovative ways that TNC has been involved is getting money out on the ground for migrating wildlife. In 2018, we developed a successful approach to delivering farm bill money out onto the ground, specifically focused on migratory big game, and also benefiting landowners which rely on this landscape as well. So through the Natural Resource Conservation Services Regional Conservation Partnership Program, I know that's a mouthful, but it's an important one. We've made over $11 million available for on-the-ground habitat restoration. This includes fence work, conservation easements, and habitat leasing within critical big game habitat. This is really a huge testament to the power of partnership. We have over 23 partners that work within this map area that work alongside us to match these grant opportunities. And really, this is the place that TNC has been able to engage landowners, impact acres, remove or modify fence that really is a testament to ensuring these migrations continue. This work has also served as a foundation for the USDA Big Game Migration Pilot, which is now the Big Game Initiative. It's now active in 3 states, which includes Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana. So TNC, has 2 of these regional conservation partnership programs that we've been a part of. We're in our 2nd one now, and looking to the future of what that holds too. I'll briefly describe the Big Game Migration Initiative and some of our role in this right now. This kind of got kicked off in the fall of 2022. It was between the state of Wyoming and the US Department of Agriculture. And this is really another funding mechanism, another pool of money to get fence modification work, wildlife friendly fencing, weed control projects out on the ground. Roughly 12,000 acres of working lands were secured and 17 conservation easements as well through this process. I'm only going to briefly touch on this because I think Art's going to speak to this and I don't want to ruin anything he's going to highlight here, but I will say that TNC's involvement with the highway wildlife vehicle collision mitigation efforts began a couple decades ago when we really started looking at the science base of this, and our science informed a lot of the original maps to identify a lot of these highway hotspots where we all know how many deer are hit daily on this section of highway. Just recently, some of you attended meeting that was held at the Denison discussing the initial stages, kicking off the actual on the ground fundraising for this effort on segment 6, which is basically from the Longhorn Ranch to the Military Vehicle Museum, where there's going to be a series of wildlife crossings combined with wildlife guide fencing to help remediate at least some of the vehicle collisions with wildlife in this area. Another great collaboration that the Nature Conservancy has been a part of is working on fence modification and removal projects. One up in Cody that we helped start was Abstroka Fence Initiative. I won't go into the details here, but it's a really great mechanism to not just do piecemeal projects, but to really work collaboratively across the landscape to identify priority migration areas for fence removal projects that's going to benefit. We're also working on a fence prioritization mapping tool with the University of Wyoming to help better roll this out on a landscape level, and hoping to get that out across the state to benefit partners. Finally, we're working in a couple of other areas around the state, everything from sagebrush seed restoration, which is key to many of these migrating ungulates' winter habitat, to best siting for renewable energy in places that are already disturbed, and also low-tech innovative technologies like beaver dam analogs that mimic the work of beavers to help improve habitat in riparian areas that are key to migrating ungulates. I certainly didn't cover everything that our migration program does, but I want to emphasize how great it is to have partners like Art and Sara and the National Bighorn Sheep Center and others to keep learning and to keep making all of this work possible. I will turn it over to Art. I know we're running behind schedule, Amanda, so hopefully people will stick around a little longer.
Thank you, Sara. Appreciate it. And you're all set.
Can you guys see that?
Yep. Take it away, Art.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Sara and Amanda, for getting this all set up and going tonight. You guys did a great job. I really want to just kind of talk about, well, like Sara Dewey was talking about, getting the youth involved and everybody else, and that working relationship between the tribes and the state and U.S. Fish and Wildlife and everybody else that's involved with the mule deer migration and all the other studies that we're doing here on the reservation. It's really important to have that good working relationship. Here's a picture of the state helping us out with one of our first annual 2023 Hunter Safety Course for tribal youth at Wyoming Indian. Also working with the state, we do a lot of fisheries. We do the sauger study, high alpine fish surveys and stuff like that, and we still always try to bring tribal youth in to get them involved to have a passion for the outdoors and want to, future stewards to take our spot when we're gone and stuff. So we want the kids to get involved and learn as much as they can as possible. Here's another outreach educational bear and predator study that we brought in the state game and fish into the tribal schools on the reservation to help get the youth more involved working on the reservation. One of the bigger things too with this mule deer migration study is that we want to kind of see what all predators are out there on the reservation and the different areas where the mule deer migrate, and of course elk and bighorn sheep and everything else. And so we do quite a bit of wolf studies on the reservation. We're seeing more and more wolves in these areas where the mule deer migrate, and the population of wolves growing in the state of Wyoming. We're also doing a lot of work with the grizzly bear study on the reservation to see, where these areas, and you can tell from this map here that the mule deer and elk kind of migrate same areas where the grizzly bears migrate. So they all kind of move around in the same areas. And so we want to kind of keep track of, invasive species, predators, other ungulates on the reservation, and kind of, manage the area as best as we can. And so to have this working relationship with the state to help us, collect all the data and make sure we're doing everything correct and safe as possible. It's great to have that working relationship between the state, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and Tribal Fish and Game. Now here's a picture of us just setting a bear trap in the Owl Creek Mountain Range on the Crow Creek. Here's after we catch a bear, we take all the samples and hair samples, blood samples, the fat samples, and everything else that we need off the bear. And then with technology these days, other than GPS on collars, it's nice to have a cell camera to let you know when the bears in the trap are close by, so you know what you're walking into the next day. With the studies of the grizzly bear and wolves and other wildlife in the areas, we were starting to see some wolverine tracks, especially in the winter range when the deer are coming back to the reservation. And so we ended up starting to do some more wolverine studies, trying to get cameras out and bait and just to see what other predators we have out here on the reservation. So with the mule deer migration, the bighorn sheep, elk, we do a lot of surveys between U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the state, and Tribal Fish and Game to kind of monitor and check the whole area, to see, follow the migration and get a good count of the populations of wildlife on the reservation. Here's a bighorn sheep capture that we're doing. State wardens, state biologists out there helping us, especially with test samples and data collection and everything else, especially certain diseases that are, pneumonia and everything else that's hurting the sheep population. Here's another mule deer migration, a map that everybody's collected. And so with this map, we want to kind of show how important it is to have a good working relationship between the state and all the other partners from the federal agencies, private landowners, and everybody else. It's really important to show that, the deer travel from jurisdiction to jurisdiction and back and forth throughout the year. And it's really important for everybody to work as a team, for the fencing and other projects, highway projects and everything else. But it just goes to show, that if we work together, the better chance the mule deer and other wildlife have. You can see here the lower picture is the pretty much what the Wind River looks like. It's the wintering range where a lot of elk and mule deer survive through the winter. There's not as much snow as there is in the Tetons. It's a lot no production, so there's a lot less housing, buildings, other facilities in the area. No oil and gas fields in these areas. There's a little bit, but not very few. And this route kind of shows, from the wintering range up to the upper picture to the summer range, how green it is and how important it is to keep that migration route accessible for the mule deer migration. And so with all the studies and the data and everything else, all these partnerships working together, projects like the US Highway 26 project and all these surveys that we're doing is showing these routes and these migration areas. And of course, all the carcasses of deer on the highway, around the Dewey area and stuff, is that, with all the technology and all the GPS locations that we're getting is showing us a path on where we need to upgrade certain projects or certain areas for a better chance of the mule deer to travel back and forth from the reservation to state and to the Tetons and stuff. So this gives us a better idea of where we could put crossings, over and under certain areas where we can make it more wildlife friendly, higher fencing so they don't go onto the highways. So this project here, the tribes and the state are putting in for funding to get this project up and going, which is a good project, which will hopefully lead to other projects in the future. And so with these studies, now we know from the higher rate areas where the mule deer are getting hit on the highways, up in the Dewey area, all the way down a couple miles onto the reservation in the Crowheart area. So this is actually helping us quite a bit to prepare and plan for funding and create more projects on and off the reservation for everybody. And so with that, I just want to kind of show all the different agencies and partnerships that everybody's working with together, and really want to thank Matt Coughlin with the University of Wyoming to getting this all up and going and coming onto the reservation and doing a really good presentation for the councils on the reservation. The Shoshone-Arapaho tribes really appreciate all the effort that everybody's doing for these projects. And, you know, here with the deer on its collar, a lot of this wouldn't be known unless we did these big projects and had that data to show that what a great job, what a great project this has been for everybody. So I know we're kind of short, so I wanted to, I'll keep it short and open it up for questions for everybody.
Thank you, Sara, and Art. I really can't thank you enough. I wholeheartedly agree that these partnerships are just everything to what makes this happen. And I cannot express how important I think this highway initiative is, really. So right now it's key between now and July to get donations in and to get pledges in to make this project happen, so we can see it happen in the future. So yes, with that, let's open it up to questions. So feel free to unmute at this point and ask questions for our experts. If we have questions, because you all covered a lot of information today, so I'm not sure if we'll have any questions at all, but this was wonderful.
I just wanted to apologize because my phone was blowing up while I was trying to give my presentation.
No problem. And I'm not seeing anybody unmute either.
Just want to say thank you. That was a really nice presentation by all three of you. So really appreciate it. Very informative.
Thank you, Tony. Yeah, and Callie says the same thing. Wonderful. And this will be recorded too, so people will be able to view it in the future. But again, I can't express enough how important it is to put money towards this project to make, you know, I'm kind of right in the middle of section 6 here. A couple crossings going, it just coming back from that meeting last week, there was a deer that was hit maybe 5 minutes right in front of me. That died right in our house, right in front of our house here. And then the next morning coming back to work, same thing. I mean, it really is a corridor where they're constantly being hit, and these migration patterns are so important to protect our animals. So just really appreciate all the efforts to make this happen. And our bighorn sheep as well are affected by this. So just thank you all for joining us this evening. And with that, if there's no more questions, appreciate you all joining us. So thanks again and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.